So are you planning on marrying a business owner? If you are, you really are a lucky champ, right? Because marrying a business owner means that you might have a comfortable life when the business actually thrives, because it will mean much more money coming into the household, right? Which is a benefit for your household and your marriage. However, as we all know, business can go south at times, which means that it will not only affect the business income, it may also affect your own personal assets, right? So what is the best way in which you can marry a business owner? What is it that I think you should do before you do so in order to ensure that you personally don't lose your assets and you ensure that your household retains sufficient and has the necessary assets even when the business goes down? Now, without further ado, let's talk about this. But before we do so, to all of those that are new here, we welcome you here and we're hoping that you're going to stay with us. My name is Yolanda Mnyengeza and I'm an attorney and a director at Mnyengeza Attorneys. Right, so today I want us to talk about how you need to structure yourself and your marriage if you're someone who's going to marry a business owner, and also how this is going to be beneficial, not only for you, but also for your family. So without further ado, let's get to the content. As you know, now the default marriage in South Africa is a marriage in community of property, right? Which means that whatever it is that you bring to the marriage, whatever your spouse brings to the marriage is going to be joined together and you both are going to be equal owners of everything, right? So potentially this also means that if your spouse's creditors cannot collect from him or her for whatever reason, they're going to also come for the assets that you brought into this marriage or you bought whilst in this marriage. Because why? Because they are equally that of your spouse and the both of you are married in community of property, right? So in that sense, you could then lose your personal assets, right? Because your spouse, owes certain people or has certain debts that they took out, whether before or during the marriage. Now, what does this have to do with you marrying someone who is actually running a business? Now, here's the thing. When a person often runs or starts a business, the business will not have any assets and it will not have much resources because it doesn't have a lot of money up front. So what the owner normally does, who's the business owner that is, will often go and source financial assistance, either from a bank or whoever is a financial, provider. Now, that particular institution, when it's about to lend money to the bank, it also needs some form of surety to make sure that if the business doesn't pop, at least there is something that we can take from this business that is valuable that we can sell in order for our debt to also be covered, right? They can't take that risk without at least having some form of security. Now, like I said, the business doesn't have money. It has nothing. It's starting. So what will the financial provider or service provider state? Well, it would often request that the business owner stands in as surety. And if the business owner has properties, obviously the business owner is going to look good, because then the bank is guaranteed or the institution is guaranteed that if the business can't pay, then at least the owner will pay out of his own pocket, or we're going to collect something in his or her own possession. Now, in the context of marriage then, remember when they are collecting, let's say the business can't pay for those debts, they're not going to only collect from his own personal assets or assets that are written, under his name. Because he is married, it will mean that even the assets that you have contributed to this marriage or brought into this marriage are also going to be in jeopardy. And this is what normally happens when the business goes down, is that the business owner also personally loses assets because of this whole thing. Meaning what? For you as the spouse, you will also be in a situation of loss because whatever assets your spouse has also belongs to you, right? So do you see why I say that you need to be cognizant of the type of way in which you marry a business owner? It's because you could also be at risk of losing those assets. So what is the best way then to marry a business owner? And potentially what the business owner could also do to try and shield his or her assets from being taken away in such a manner. So first things first, As someone who's going to marry someone who is in business or a business owner, it always makes sense to separate your assets, right? To get married out of community or property. For what reason? Like I said, to ensure that the assets that you have and everything you have remains separate. So how is this going to help, or what usefulness is coming with this type of marriage? Now, the usefulness is that if, for example, now the business is unable to pay for any of those debts, which the business owner has stood as surety, at least you will know that his or her creditors, the business owner that is, will not be able to collect any of the assets that are written in your name, because your marriage is a marriage out of community or property and your assets are separate. Which means what? Which means that if the business is going potentially down, it's disastrous and everything is at loss and your spouse is losing assets, at least in this marriage, there's going to be assets that you guys can say, at least we are covered. There's going to be, if you have properties, at least you will know that you still have a roof over your head, unlike a situation where you are now married to this person in community or property, and when the creditors come, everything is lost. So this is the usefulness of a marriage out of community or property, more especially when you're going to marry a business owner. So how can the business owner himself also, protect some of his assets, so that if such an event occurs in the future, at least he doesn't lose a lot of things, more especially even if he is not married. Let's talk about this. So how can a business owner also protect themselves in such an instance? Is there a certain entity that they can make use of, to ensure that at least even if a creditor of the business comes in the future, they at least have some assets that are protected and safe? Well, if the business wants to ensure that they are also protected and safeguarded, one of the things that they should ideally do is to set up an entity we call a trust. Do you remember what a trust is? A trust is an entity that is set up by a person we call the founder. So this entity is going to keep all of those assets, right? And it's going to be administered by people we call trustees. So ideally, the founder moves all of these things that he or she wants to move into the possession of the trustees, and then the trustees administers those things for the benefit of people we call beneficiaries. And the beneficiaries are the people that are going to benefit from those things placed in that particular entity. Who can be a beneficiary? A beneficiary can be the founder, can be anybody else that the founder names as a beneficiary, so that that person can also benefit from those things placed in the trust. So what's the main idea with placing all of these in a trust or in an entity such as a trust? The idea is that the owner or the business owner should not have a lot of properties that are named in his or her name, because if properties remain in his or her name, what's going to happen is that the creditors, when they come to collect, they will be able to attach the things that he or she owns in his or her personal capacity. But the things in a trust, because they don't belong, to the owner anymore, but rather are placed in a trust, the creditors can't touch those things. They can't get access to those things, although the owner or the business owner continues to benefit from those very things. So do you see why it's important to also consider putting such a structure in place? Because like we said at the beginning, it happens that a business, will get to a position where it can't pay certain debts. And then now the creditors, because the business owner stood as surety, will want to collect from the business owner. At least the business owner will be safeguarded if some of the things are placed in the trust, because the creditors will only be able to take the things that they have personally in their name. So do you see how this entity can then protect the interests of you as the business owner? So I hope this discussion was helpful, but I'm just going to reiterate number one, be very calculative about the type of marriage you enter into, especially if you're going to marry a business owner. Not because you're looking at the fact that maybe in the future you're just going to divorce when things go south, but rather for the purpose of ensuring that if your spouse is in trouble and they are losing everything, at least you as the other spouse, can stand as their shield by ensuring that your own properties are still in existence, so that at least this marriage is not without anything. Because just imagine the both of you losing everything that you've ever worked for just because something went bad in business. And as we all know, business can go south either day, right? So it's best you really think about the type of marriage before you enter into a marriage, in order to ensure that both of your interests as people who are married are always protected. And number two, if you're a business owner, you do know that you're at risk, right? Even though a business is a separate entity. So you also need to find ways, strategic ways on how to ensure that your own assets are protected, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're losing everything because of this one business that was meant to actually, elevate you, and that probably elevated you in the past, right? So just be cognizant of those two things and make sure that you always take these types of actions beforehand. I always say that don't waste time when you have to take such actions, because once you are in a situation, you can't change anything. You can't do anything about it. For example, business owners try to hide things when creditors are coming, setting up trusts at that particular point in time. And by then, it's not going to be helpful. And normally, we don't assist people when it comes to that kind of situation, because it's already too late. And if it's seen that we actually set up the trust and move the assets when the creditors were coming to collect, we are also at jeopardy, and also you, and that trust is not safe because you moved that asset when already the creditor was coming and was owed by the business. So make sure that you take timeless action. Do not delay when it comes to these things. Your interests will always be protected if you're always mindful of such things. So this brings us to the end of our discussion today, and I hope this was helpful. And like we always say, if it was helpful to you, definitely it can be helpful to another person. So don't hesitate to share, like, and also subscribe, because we'll be talking more about these kinds of things that you probably need to be aware of. Right, so my name is Yolanda Mnyangeza, and I'm an attorney and a director at Mnyangeza Attorneys. We will see you next time.